Did you ever notice how every so often you'll come across an article that claims that researchers have discovered some miracle drug or supplement or food that's supposed to be a cure-all, and then a week or two later, researchers have discovered that the very same miracle drug will kill you? Do you ever wonder why that happens? Well, wonder no more, because today on this episode, I'm going to break it down for you. We're going to talk about research. We're going to talk about why you can have seemingly conflicting results and why it confuses the crap out of people. And I'm not going to lie to you, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get pretty nerdy in here.
You're listening to Nervous Breakdowns, a podcast where your questions about relationships, dating, personality, and mental health are answered by Zinno Tramontelli, a nationally certified counselor with a master's degree in clinical and counseling psychology. Here's the man himself, Zinno Tramontelli.
So the idea for this podcast comes from a discussion I was having recently with a friend of mine. And it's also a topic that comes up quite frequently in my work, my professional life, where people come to me and they see an article on Facebook, it gets shared, or on the internet, or whatever, and they say, this thing that we accept, researchers are showing that it doesn't really work or doesn't help, or what gives? How is it that something could, last week be a cure-all, a miracle, a wonderful thing for you to have, and this week it doesn't seem to help? Professionally speaking, one of the biggest ones was antidepressants, and how antidepressants are said to cause suicidal thoughts. And I do have to spend time with my clients and sometimes explain to them how these results get arrived at in order for them to make informed decisions about their care. But I think that in a general sense, for general wellness, it's important to understand why we can see results that are seemingly inconsistent. And what I hear is, inevitably, to somebody who is just reading articles, a sense of frustration, a sense that, well, look, if they can't make up their minds, how the hell am I supposed to make up my mind? And the whole thing is garbage. The whole idea of researching things and figuring it out seems to me to be inconsistent and unreliable, and so I'm just not going to pay any attention to it. And I don't believe that. I believe that research is quite consistent. Statistics can be quite reliable. I don't believe that research and statistics can be manipulated to reflect any result. I think that if you are looking at data and you're running math on it, it's math, right? We're going to have a very consistent and very accurate, repeatable result, okay? But what I think happens is that when we read articles, lots of things get confabulated or misconstrued or misinterpreted. And I don't think it's unintentional, actually. I think that there's a very intentional force behind some of these things that can sometimes be difficult to understand. So for the purpose of that, I picked a topic that I'm going to talk about today, which I don't really have any great experience with. This is a nutrition topic. I'm not a nutritional expert. This is a topic that seemed to have a lot of data available, and is one that I think a lot of people have heard of. So I wanted to talk about it, not for its own sake, but for the sake of using it as an example of how to be an educated consumer of some of the information that we get. Because, especially when it comes to nutrition and dieting and things like that, which are important to us, right? Especially, I know myself, as I'm getting older and I'm starting to feel my age, I'm starting to pay more attention to the things that I put in my body, and starting to be more careful and more intentional about that. So I want to be sure that I can make the best decisions possible. Same thing holds true for your medical care. If you're going to a doctor and they're prescribing treatment for you, as a provider of healthcare, I love when my clients come to me and they're well informed, because it saves me a lot of work. It saves me the work of having to explain the basics, and I can tell them in a clear way why I think a particular treatment is going to be helpful for them. So today I'm going to be talking about the benefits of red wine. Again, not because I particularly espouse the use of red wine or because I think it's particularly helpful or because, no, none of that stuff. I used it because there was an abundance of research on the topic, and I was also able to find a lot of articles that illustrate very specific points I want to make today. So, this is going to be a nerdy discussion. I'm not going to make any bones about that. I think it'll be interesting. I know I'm interested in it, but if you're not interested in learning about how to interpret research, you can check out some of my other podcasts. Incidentally, if you think this topic sucks and you want to tell me about it, you can tweet me. I'm at Breakdowns with G. You can email me, breakdownswithg@gmail.com. Follow me on Tumblr as well, breakdownswithg.tumblr.com. Again, give me the feedback. I want to hear it. Share this with somebody who you think might like it. Anyway, here we go. Let's get into it. So why is red wine something that's getting studied a lot? This is just a little bit of history to kind of give you some background, some flavor. Red wine is studied often because of something that's called the French paradox. What happens is many years ago, the connection was made between eating a lot of saturated fats and having heart problems, right? So people that eat a lot of butter, a lot of oils, a lot of fried foods, et cetera, are more likely to have heart problems toward the end of their lives. They're going to have blocked arteries, they're going to have heart attacks, you name it. But there's an exception. There's the French paradox. They found that people in France tend to eat a high saturated fat diet, but also tend to do really well with their hearts. And they're an exception to the rule. So researchers started to look for some possible reasons. So one possible reason for that is that they were wrong about saturated fats, right? That saturated fats don't, in fact, cause heart disease. But they had so much evidence suggesting that it didn't seem like that was the appropriate conclusion to reach, right? Like people that they find people that are obese, that have high saturated fat diets, tend to have more of the chronic heart problems that you associate, with eating poorly, right? So they tend to need more bypasses, tend to have more chest pain, et cetera, et cetera. Now you're going to notice I'm saying the word tend to, because we're talking about correlations here, and I'm going to get back to that. I'm going to hit that in a second because that's a big piece of this discussion today. So they didn't want to throw out the idea that saturated fats and heart disease are related. So the next logical conclusion is that there's something special about French people. There's something about something else that they do that must be counteracting the high saturated fats in their diets. If you look at French food, it's very cheesy, it's very rich, it's delicious. But it's not very good for you. If that was your diet all the time, you'd have some trouble. So researchers started to look at them, and one of the things that they noticed was that French people, compared to other people, tend to drink a lot of red wine. And they looked at red wine and what's in it, and there's this one particular compound in it that keeps coming up called, and I'm gonna butcher this. I'm gonna sound it out just like I learned in phonics. Resveratrol. This is a chemical that's found in the skins of red grapes, and it's also abundant in red wine. And they found that this, so researchers started to study this compound, resveratrol. And the two articles that I'm going to talk about today both relate to resveratrol, right? So the first one is this. It was printed in 2010, and it says, red wine helps the heart. Resveratrol in red wine may prevent immature fat cells from maturing. Okay, this is from WebMD. So this article goes on and talks about how this compound affects the way we metabolize fat, that it, it stimulated glucose uptake in human fat cells and blocked molecules from converting into fat. Moreover, resveratrol influenced SIRT1 in a beneficial way and also affected the secretion of blah, blah, blah. A lot of jargon here, guys. But in other words, the article is saying that there's a lot of benefits to red wine. But let's look a little deeper into it, okay? So this is the first thing I want you to do. When you see an article, if you're curious about the topic, when you see an article, typically it'll be in some kind of a publication. It'll be in the Star Ledger. It'll be in the Huffington Post. It'll be in a news outlet. it won't be printed. You won't be reading the raw article. You'll be reading a reporter who wrote a summary of the article and is interested in delivering to you the summary, the salient points, okay? But because you're doing that, what you're going to find is that you're going to have an attention-grabbing headline, which may not necessarily affect or reflect what's actually found in the study. And this is where I think a big piece of our problem comes from. Red wine is good for your heart, and red wine doesn't help you at all. These are the two articles that I have. And so what I encourage you to do is to read through the article. And in the article, they'll usually reference the original research. In this one, they found, so this is a WebMD article by Katrina Woznicki, who seems to be some kind of a science reporter, and she references the article. So the actual article was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition by some scientists in Ulm, Germany. All right, so I looked for it. I went and found it, and it's a lengthy article. It's 11 pages long. And guys, I don't have medical training. As a counselor, I learned about mental health and therapy, but I don't really have a lot of scientific knowledge. I did have to learn how to consume research as part of my clinical training because it's important for me to know about research. But when it starts coming, biochemistry starts coming in, I'm at a loss. So let me be upfront with that. And a lot of this article is very difficult for me to understand. The title of the article is Resveratrol Regulates Human Adipocyte Number and Function in a SIRT1 Dependent Manner. Sounds very interesting, doesn't it? No, it's not interesting. And it's not interesting because the researchers of this article didn't write this for you and I to read. This article is a very specific, jargon-filled article intended for other researchers, okay? And the way they conducted the research is what's called a true experiment. They didn't give people red wine and see how it affected them. No, they were introducing this resveratrol to clone cells in a petri dish, all right? And they were finding very specific results. So they found that it had these impacts. It affected the way the cells metabolize glucose and affected the way the cells process fat in a dish. Okay, again, I can't emphasize that enough. In a dish, this is a cell. It's not a living organ. I mean, it's a living organism, but it's not a complete organism. It's a cell that has been prepared very specifically. It is cloned in many cases. The cell is one that is identical. So petri dish A, B, and C are genetically identical. The idea of working in an experiment of this magnitude is to eliminate as many variables as possible so that you can be sure that the changes that you're making are the changes that are causing the differences that you're seeing. In other words, if I wanted to see if a certain compound kills a cell and I have 10 of the same cell, I can give the compound to 5 of them and give nothing to the other 5. And if the 5 that I gave the compound to died, I can say with pretty decent certainty that compound is deadly to those cells, right? And these researchers are doing it even more more subtly than that. I mean, they account for variance with statistics, with the way they with numbers. I mean, they're doing these studies on large numbers of samples, and they're even introducing neutral compounds to see if they respond, similarly to other things. So when I guess the point I'm trying to make is the results that we're seeing here in this article are only in a very peripheral way applicable to people. I mean, this is a dish in a lab with a cell in it, and they're giving this resveratrol to it, and they're seeing some interesting results, which is what they reported in the article. The other thing that they report in the article is that they're giving the resveratrol to these cells in a concentration, in an amount that we would never get from drinking red wine. Something like 400 times what the average person drinking red wine would get. Okay? So it isn't even directly applicable to the consumption of red wine. I mean, this doesn't mean necessarily that red wine, just drinking that, would have these effects on you. Okay? So what's the point of this research? Well, I mean, it's what we call pure research. It's good to know this because it increases our understanding of what certain compounds do to us. Will it necessarily have impact on a real person? Not necessarily, but it's not. It's also that's not exactly the idea. It's not exactly the point of this type of research. The point of this type of research is just to increase knowledge. Just like the scientists in Switzerland with the Large Hadron Collider, they're smashing particles together. I mean, they had some ideas about the way that it's going to turn out, but the point of doing these experiments is to see what happens. I mean, they may find nothing useful in there other than to increase their knowledge of the way the universe is, and that's okay. That will eventually, hopefully, lead to something functional or applicable. So we have an article here in which it says resveratrol in red wine may prevent immature fat cells from maturing. Okay, that's a pretty fair headline, in my opinion. When you consider what the article is actually saying. Now, more recently, and this one was all over Facebook, is the news. Well, I found it on the New Zealand Herald. There's the actual website that I printed it from, but it's a Reuters article, so it's what do they call it? Syndicated. It's printed in several outlets. But it says, now the bad news, chocolate and wine isn't good for you. So, I mean, I know for the longest time, I just took it as gospel that red wine was supposed to have some good. Drink a glass of red wine a day is great for you. And when I saw this article, it caught my attention. Again, this is an article written by a journalist, a science journalist, clearly, but somebody who's trying to get more clicks on their website. And so they're going to print an article that is attention-grabbing, or a headline that is attention-grabbing to that end. Now, does it necessarily reflect the article? All right. So once again, I disregard the initial article where I read it. I read through it, and I see lead researcher Professor Richard Semba from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, United States, and later in the article it references the title. So I went and found that the actual article, again, a long article, 12 pages long, and the title of the article is Resveratrol Levels and All-Cause Mortality in Older Community-Dwelling Adults. That's the article, okay? Resveratrol Levels and All-Cause Mortality in Older Community-Dwelling Adults. Again, an awful title if you're trying to get somebody to read this. In fact, if you don't know what you're looking for, you have no idea what this even means. Like, what is this article even about? And what they did was a different kind of article, a different kind of research called a study. Okay. Now, again, an important distinction here. In an experiment, you're working in a lab and you have a great deal of control over your subjects. If you're working on cells, you go to great lengths to make sure that there's no variation between cell A, cell B, cell C. You'll clone them. You'll try to prepare them exactly the same. If there's any contamination, you'll throw them out. You don't want them because you don't want your results to be possibly caused by this variation. All right. Now, this is very handy in a lot of researchers. I mean, we do it with animals as well. They see lab mice, they clone those, or they line breed them to have as little variation as possible. Or in many cases, they'll breed laboratory mice to have a very particular genetic abnormality, like it doesn't produce a certain protein, or it doesn't have pigment in its skin. That's why a lot of them are albinos. But the idea being that they're going to treat these animals as experiments. You can have some ethical problems with that because they are living creatures. But in research, living animals like mice are not treated like human beings. They're treated like lab subjects, and they will do with a great deal of control experiments on them and be able to say at the end of the experiment with a great deal of certainty, right, with a pretty good idea that the thing that they did caused the change or didn't cause the change, what the result is. Okay. Now, this is a problem when you're talking about people, okay? Because you can't take a person and stick them in a lab and control every facet of their lives, right? Many times, I mean, in order to do that, think about what you'd have to do. You'd have to basically raise a baby from birth, just like 20 other babies, let's say, feed them all the same foods, give them all the same amount of education, ideally maybe even clone them so that they're all the same genetically, and run your experiments on them. And if they die, they die, right? You would never be able to do that. Okay? I mean, I don't even, it's absurd. You know, it's like some science fiction stuff that we're talking about here. So what they do is they do studies, okay? They take people and they look for relationships between different factors. You know, in other words, if I wanted to study the relationship between height and intelligence, I would take 100 people, I would measure their height, I would measure their intelligence, and see if there's any statistical relationship. I'd run some, powerful statistical formulas to try to find out if there's a correlation. And I could say that that a certain thing tends to go with another certain thing. For example, lots of research has been done on this, but people with diabetes tend to be more at risk for depression. All right, that's a known thing. Okay, can we say that diabetes causes depression? No, it's not a causative relationship. It's correlation. We can say that when we see somebody with diabetes, they're more likely to have depression than somebody that's not. Okay, how would I ever say that one causes the other? Well, essentially, I'd have to take a person, induce diabetes in them, right? And then see if they're more depressed, right? So I'd take 100 people, I'd give them diabetes somehow, I'd destroy their ability to produce insulin, and then see how their mood turns out. I mean, forget about the fact that they'd probably be pretty depressed because I just gave them diabetes. It would just be awfully unethical, right? Now, the problem with correlations is we see a relationship, but we can't say which way the relationship goes. So, in the diabetes and depression one, do people with depression tend to eat more poorly and tend to consume diets that will lead to diabetes? Or do people with diabetes have some biochemical problem that makes them more depressed? Again, impossible to know. Okay, so I just want to point out the difference. And this second article is a research study. It's a study on people. And it's what they did was they took a couple of hundred people, actually more than that, I think almost 1,000 people. Yeah, almost 1,000, more than 1,000. Wait a second. Okay, 783 people. They took 783 people living in the Chianti region of Italy. It's in Tuscany, and they checked them to see if what kind of resveratrol levels they had. They took urine from them, and they compared over time their mortality. They wanted to see, does resveratrol necessarily lead to better health? Does it lead to lower mortality rate? And they did this. They took these people, they took the resveratrol level, they learned a lot of other information about them, and they eventually followed them year after year and saw how they turned out. And so, they found that some, after 9 years, about 268 of the people died. One of the important pieces of information here is that the 783 people were all ages 65 and up. So they were all already older. 9 years later, 34% of them died. And, they looked at their general health, like how many developed cancer, how many developed heart problems, how many developed diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. And they compared their level of resveratrol to how sick they got. And after they ran these statistical analyses, they found that, for example, men that tended to have higher resveratrol levels tended to drink more. Shocking, right? I mean, if you're getting resveratrol from red wine and you drink a lot of red wine, you're going to have more in your system than somebody that doesn't. They tended to smoke more, all right? And they also tended to be more active than people with lower resveratrol levels. But what they didn't find was that resveratrol was linked in some way to mortality. So in other words, the people with the high resveratrol level didn't have any higher or lower risk for cancer than those without. They didn't have any higher or lower risk for heart disease. And they did this statistically. Now, what's the best they could hope to come up with here? They could hope to come up with a statistical relationship, what they would call something significant. Significance is basically any number beyond a certain point is more than we would say is by chance. So, if I flip a coin 20 times, I might get a string of heads in a row, right? But if I get like 10 heads in a row, that's pretty statistically significant, let's just say. I mean, I'm oversimplifying here, but I don't want to get too much into the weeds. And so the article basically says, look, we couldn't find any relationship in this group of people from Italy that are 65 and up between resveratrol and their health. Once again, now, does that mean necessarily that resveratrol isn't good for you? No, because let's look at the whole article. They also found that the people who tended to have more resveratrol tended to consume more alcohol, right? And alcohol on its own is not that great for you. There's a lot of health, blood pressure, and there's a lot of health problems that come along with alcohol. They also found that they tended to smoke more. Okay, which it doesn't even bear discussing. Smoking's bad for you, right? So, but they were also more active. So it's hard to know. They had high resveratrol, which is good, but also high alcohol, which is bad, and also smoke, which is bad. But we're also more active, which is good. So who knows if at the end of the day, this compound in your body counterbalanced those things and actually was good for them, because in spite of the fact that they smoked and drank more, they weren't any more or less likely to die. Maybe that was helpful. But I guess the long and the short of what I'm saying is that this type of study can't say for sure if the compound was responsible for these things. They can just say, look, we didn't find any relationship. And the researchers spend, again, 11 or 12 pages talking about how they selected their participants, talking about how they tested them, talking about the different demographics. If you read in, you can find out that how many men were in there, how many women, what their average age was, how they found the people. Again, it gets very specific, and it's not the article is not written for general consumption. The article is written for other researchers. In my other show with Dr. Burkholder, he's the child parenting expert in episode 19. He talked about writing an article, and the joke is that article will be read by tens of people, and that's true. A lot of these articles get published, which is a great honor for a researcher. They get published, but the people who are interested in reading them are other researchers. We're talking about a small number of people, and they're usually interested in citing your work in their own research. What they want to do is they want to use the work you've done to save them work, and then they're gonna build on it. So if I find, for example, that resveratrol changes the way we metabolize fats in a petri dish, I might say, hey, look, I read this in my own article. I read this other article about resveratrol and the way it affects cells in a petri dish, and here's the next step. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take and try it in mice, right? Because we had positive benefits with the cells in the petri dish. Let's see what it does to mice, and then build that way, and eventually maybe find out if something's really helpful for you or not. Anyway, the bottom line here is that you end up with two conflicting articles, and the articles themselves, the base research is actually not conflicting. One article says, in a petri dish, these cells reacted this way to this compound. The other article says, hey, when we look at a bunch of old people in these mountains in Italy, the people that had higher levels of this compound didn't tend to live any longer or be any healthier. All right? Where it gets confusing and where it seems to contradict is in the way the articles are they're shared with us in the media. Okay? So what I encourage you to do is, if you find an article that seems interesting to you, try this experiment. Look at the article, see what the researcher says, what their name is, what university they went to. Google the researcher and the name of the university, and see if you can find the original article. See what exactly is being said. It's a little dry, it's a little nerdy, sure. Look, I've been honest about that with you guys. If you've listened this far, you're the cool kids, okay? But the point I'm trying to make is, when you're interested in putting something in your body, you owe yourself at least this little bit of work. You owe yourself this diligence and saying, look, I read the article. I read, first of all, the hype article, which says, hey, resveratrol is no good for you, right? But then I went and looked at what the researchers said, and I understand the nuances, all right? So I can make a more informed decision about whether or not to drink red wine. What, should you drink it or not? I don't really think I don't think that if you're drinking it or not drinking, it's going to make a difference of years and years of your life. If I think that it's more about just making a decision that you feel comfortable with. Okay, so I hope that this answers some questions for some people, because I love research. I think that research is important. Let me backtrack for a second. When I was in graduate school and I was learning about research and statistics, I couldn't have hated it more. I thought it was so stupid because I didn't really care to do it myself. I didn't care to conduct research. I just wanted to know what works and then apply it to help people, because I'm more clinically focused. But now, as I'm getting more into the field and I'm more experienced, I really am appreciating the nuance. Some of these researchers finding different ways to test a subject that's nebulous. For example, testing something like intelligence is difficult to do because there's not even a really great definition for what intelligence is. Testing anxiety, for example, testing treatments for anxiety. I was fortunate enough to be involved in a study with some researchers from Dartmouth University where we treated post-traumatic stress. The post-traumatic stress was treated in 2 groups. We took a bunch of people that were identified to have PTSD. Half of them were randomly assigned to this special treatment where they did 15 sessions of a manual type treatment. Another half were assigned to a treatment where they were taught a relaxation technique and watched a video. And they looked at what the outcomes were, okay? And the truth of the matter is, by doing that, they could see if their treatment was working, or if there was something else that was causing any kind of a change. So yeah, research is really interesting. Research builds on other research, and we can come up with some pretty great knowledge about the world. We can really learn about the way our universe functions and make better choices. All right, guys. So this has been arguably my most dorky podcast. And like I said, if you're still with me, you are in the cool club. The cool crowd is here. And please, if you thought this was cool and informative, give me some feedback. I'm at Breakdowns with G. Email me, breakdownswithg@gmail.com. If you thought it sucked, and believe me, I can take it. If you thought this sucked, let me know also. I want to hear the feedback. I want to hear the topics you want to hear about. Okay, your feedback informs my show choices. I have a couple kind of in the chamber ready to go in terms of shows, but I could always use some more ideas. And thank you, guys. Please share this with a friend, and we'll catch you next time.